Terry, juste pour tout le monde, on veut savoir si Jean-Paul est aussi dérangeant en visio qu'en chambre. Donc, non, t'es pas obligé de...
I'm not hearing translation for. There's no translation.
We want to know if Jean-Paul is as bothersome.
Order and welcome everyone. Looks like we have a full house today, colleagues, so I know we'll be on our best behavior. And a special welcome to the students of Laurentide La Belle and Madame Gaudreau. Welcome. I've served with her on committee, a terrific member of Parliament. I hope that helps with your constituents, Madame Gaudreau. But all party support. And let me start, as we always do, by acknowledging that we are meeting on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. Welcome to meeting 34 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources. And today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format, as we have one of our colleagues online. Pursuant to Standing Order 81-4 and the motion adopted on Thursday, March 26, 2026, the committee is commencing consideration of the main estimates of 2026-27 referred to the committee on Thursday, February 26, 2026. And pursuant to Standing Order 81-5 and the motion adopted on Tuesday, February 24th, 2026, the committee is commencing consideration of the subject study matter of the Supplementary Estimate C 2025-2026 referred to the committee on Thursday, February 12th, 2026. Pursuant to the motion adopted on December 4th, 2025, the committee shall resume its study of management of Canadian nuclear laboratories by U.S. Companies. I know that was scintillating, colleagues, and got through it as quickly as I could. And let me now welcome our witnesses, and a special welcome, of course, to the Honourable Tim Hodgson, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. And we have just about the whole family from Natural Resources Canada with us today. Welcome. And I have to name you, as they may be asked questions by members of Parliament. Greg Orenchak, Deputy Minister. Jeff Labonte, Associate Deputy Minister. Claudine Paget, Director General, Minerals Program Branch, Lands and Minerals Sector. Francis Brisson, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer, Corporate Management and Services Sector. Frank Desrosiers, Assistant Deputy Minister, Energy Efficiency and Technology Sector. Glenn Hargrove, Assistant Deputy Minister, Canadian Forest Service. Kimberly Lavoie, Assistant Deputy Minister. Nok Wewashak, pronounced that correctly. Drew Leyburn, Assistant Deputy Minister, Energy Systems Sector. Aaron O'Brien, Assistant Deputy Minister, Fuels Sector. And I'll be introducing others in the second round. But Minister, again, welcome, and you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Bonjour à tous. Merci
Good morning,
beaucoup.
everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. I also want to note that we're meeting on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe. The main estimates are being considered by the committee today are a blueprint for how we build energy security, strengthen our sovereignty and our economy, and ensure that every region of Canada can succeed. Because we're living through a global rupture, an even more tumultuous time than when I last appeared before this committee. Since then, the conflict in the Middle East has driven up fuel prices around the world. We have contributed to the IEA's largest ever oil stock release, and our government has acted to temporarily suspend the fuel excise tax on gasoline and diesel across Canada, bringing the total amount of taxes cut on a litre of gasoline to 28 cents since we were first elected. To make Canada more energy secure and less reliant on external factors, our government is also working to realize Canada's full potential in both clean and conventional energy. We're building big in electricity, in LNG and nuclear to provide all Canadians with clean, reliable, and affordable power. At the same time, supply chains continue to shift. The global demand for energy and minerals is rising, and our allies are looking to Canada as a stable, responsible trading partner. To illustrate how we're responding to this need and diversifying Canadian exports beyond the United States, I would like to highlight a few examples contained in these estimates which respond to these issues with clarity and purpose. First, this year's estimates include a total commitment of $2.3 billion to unlock the infrastructure, the technology, and the processing capacity needed to turn Canada's critical mineral wealth into a long-term opportunity for this country. This will strengthen our economic security by fulfilling domestic defense, manufacturing, and clean energy demand, and getting minerals to new global markets. Second, with over $392 million sought for the Smart Renewable and Electrification Pathway Program, we are modernizing Canada's grid so that power remains affordable, clean, and resilient. We're also taking significant steps to further support our forest sector as it pivots to new products and markets, including $157 million for our suite of forest sector transformation programs. With the conclusion of the Canadian Forest Sector Transformational Task Force's mandate this past week, our government will be responding to their report by setting out our vision for the sector. I look forward to having more to say about our ambition to pivot and grow the forest sector in the coming weeks. At the same time, our new government and the Natural Resources Canada are collectively taking fiscal responsibility, and the Prime Minister's promise to spend less so we can invest more with the utmost seriousness. That's why it's worth noting that even as we deliver for more Canadians, the 2026-2027 Natural Resources Canada budget is seeking $4.8 billion in budgetary authorities, a decrease of 5% from last year. Mr. Chair, all Canadians feel the urgency of this moment. Business as usual will not meet the scale of what workers and their families expect from us, given the challenges and the opportunities we face. To make good on what we have promised to Canadians, we must be bold and move forward with purpose. Our new Liberal government's approach to energy and natural resources means we are thinking bigger, building smarter, and moving faster as one country with one economy and one shared future. I look forward to your questions. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. We're now going to open it up to questions, comments from members, and we're going to start with Mrs. Stubbs. Mrs. Stubbs, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here, and to your officials for joining you here today. Minister, when will the construction of your promised pipeline to the Pacific begin?
So to be clear, I believe you're referring to the pipeline to the Pacific that Alberta is proposing. So it's not our pipeline. It's being proposed by the province of Alberta as a proponent. And what they have indicated is they would be ready by July 1st to bring a proposal forward. At that time, we would be evaluating it. Of course, the proponent is the one who brings it forward, so it's up to them to bring it forward at that point.
But you've made the agreement to all Canadians. You want Canada to be an energy superpower. A pipeline to the Pacific is necessary to get beyond the U.S. So on what date will the Pacific pipeline start getting built?
As I said, we don't build the pipelines. The proponents build the pipelines. It's up to the proponent to bring a proposal forward. My understanding is Alberta intends to meet its
So as you know, the
communicated.
proponents who would build that pipeline have said you have to repeal anti-energy laws, regulations, policies for them to be able to build that pipeline. You said you want to do that after C5. So how quickly will you get those laws fixed so that you can tell Canadians the date on which the pipeline that you promised to the Pacific will be constructed?
So as you well know, the federal government and the government of Alberta have a plan together to work collectively in collaboration with a shared goal.
So what are you doing to get the private sector proponent who will build the pipeline to the Pacific that you promised Canadians would get built, and in under 2 years, given the language around C5?
So we are working with Alberta and with the Pathways Alliance
But on what date?
when the proponent brings it forward.
So there is no proponent, there is no pipeline, and you have no date. That sounds
Alberta-
so far like you're not
Alberta-
going to meet the promise you made. So I guess we'll
Alberta
move
has
on.
indicated they plan to be a proponent. The government
But
is not
you and
the
your
proponent.
Prime Minister have promised to make Canada an energy superpower. You say Canada is in a crisis because of our biggest trading partner, customer, and competitor who is threatening Canada. We need to get beyond those markets. You have promised the pipeline to the Pacific. That's an interjurisdictional pipeline for export, indisputably federal jurisdiction. So on what date will you want a private sector proponent to begin construction on the Pacific Pipeline that you promised Canadians, of which the majority want to be built?
I know you'd like a different answer. The answer is the same. The proponent brings the proposal forward. Just
And the
like,
proponents
just
have
like
said
the,
they will
just,
build a pipeline unless you
just-
change the laws. So when
just-
are you changing the laws?
just like the proponent for the Taylor to Gordondale pipeline brought it forward and it was approved and they are now building. And just like the
So we're more than a year in and you have no answer. Okay, so let's move on. On April 17th, 2025, the Prime Minister, as you well know, said China is Canada's greatest security threat. So just as Minister, I wonder, do you support more control of Canada's oil and gas by foreign regime-owned companies?
I believe what the Prime Minister said is we need to engage with the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. And
On
that we
April
need,
17th,
and that
he
we
was
need,
asked what is Canada's greatest security
And-
threat. His answer was China.
and what, if you let me answer, I will
It's
try
about
to
time
do
for
that.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's not talk over one another, please. Minister?
Well, my first question was 10 seconds, and he did go for 35. So if you want to adjudicate like that, you go ahead, Chair. Or I'm going to have to.
Minister, proceed.
So what we said is China is the second largest trading country in the world. It is an important trading partner. We had a paused relationship with China. We are rebuilding our relations with China. We have a pragmatic engagement where we have a clear window of in areas where we agree and areas where we don't agree.
So let me just ask you about one of the projects that you recently did refer to the MPO, that road, the Grays Bay project that leads to this Chinese state-owned Isaac mine. Now, you said Arctic security is a top priority. Conservatives have always said that. We agree. Does your government view this as a national security concern? And can you answer whether or not that mine has been designated for a national security review under the Investment Canada Act or by the MPO, which your legislation also seems to set out to be their role? The MPO.
The Grays Bay Port and Road is a national security priority. It is a development in the Arctic priority. It is an economic priority. There are many, many deposits along that road. Many, many potential proponents will be bringing things forward. To my knowledge, the company that I think you're referring to has not come forward and proposed a mine. If it did propose a mine, we would look at it at that time.
Is it just easy for you to rule out, as minister concerned about Canada's security and sovereignty,
So-
that you would
so
rule
what-
out? But
what
can I
we-
just actually finish my question?
Okay, sure.
Would you rule out majority Chinese ownership of Canadian resource development, say in oil and gas or critical minerals?
So what we have is we have the Investment Canada Act. We have the ability to look at any new investment in the country. We'll evaluate it against the realities of the time, and if we deem it a net benefit to Canada, it would proceed.
But
We
since the
have
Prime
we have
Minister said China
Chinese
is
we
Canada's
we have
greatest
Chinese
security
ownership.
threat.
China's a major owner in LNG Canada 1. In that situation,
Is it a threat?
folks, that's the time for this round. I'm going to go on to Mr. Clark for 6 minutes. Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Minister, and officials as well. Thank you very much for being here today, this afternoon. Minister, I wanted to ask you, one of the things that's come up during the course of our study on energy exports are issues around regulatory certainty and simplicity. And I know that's something that yourself and the Prime Minister and the government have been very focused on as well since the election last year. One of the key pieces of that is to sign cooperation and substitution agreements with as many provinces and territories as possible. I know my own province of Nova Scotia signed one about a month ago when the Prime Minister was in Halifax with Premier Houston. So, Minister, could you just give us an update on where those agreements stand and the positive impact you think they will have on the energy future of the country?
Yeah. You're referring to the one project, one review?
Yes.
Okay. So in addition to establishing the Major Projects Office, and the work is underway to secure cooperation agreements with each and every province, as we've talked about, province and territory, to establish the concept of one project, one review. To date, 7 agreements have been signed. Those agreements are with Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, Manitoba, Alberta, and there is an existing one with BC from when we started this process. One additional jurisdiction has a draft working document, and 2 are close to having draft agreements developed or finalized.
And Minister, what would you say is the primary benefit for not just governments, but more importantly for, as you talked about in the previous round, proponents and people who want to do business here in the country to have those agreements in place?
So one of the things we've heard very clearly from proponents is they would like to see a depancaking of regulation. Where there is overlapping federal and provincial or territorial regulation, they'd like to see those collapsed into one set of engagements around regulation, one set of consultations. And so the concept of one project, one review says where the federal government has an agreement with a province that there is an equivalency of their regulations, the federal government will step aside. So we will rely on the work that the provincial government does. If they do that work, we will conclude they've done the equivalent of what we would do, and we will step aside. The most, I think, poignant example of that is actually the Silesans LNG facility, where last fall the BC government approved what will be the second largest private sector investment in the history of the country, a over $30 billion new export facility. That project was approved on a Monday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon by the BC government. And at 4:30 that same day, the federal government approved it, relying on the work of the BC government. When one project, one review works properly, that's what we should see happen.
Yeah, that's a wonderful example. And having been on the provincial side, I know that it's wonderful when we can work together and simplify and harmonize those things, as you say. Minister, another priority, I think, would be around electricity. So we know that demand for electricity over the next couple of decades is likely going to double here in Canada, and we will need to work together again with provinces, territories, Indigenous groups to modernize and expand the supply and distribution of electricity in this country. Could you share for us what work is underway in the department and what investments might be included in the estimates that will help us meet that significant demand over the next 10 to 20 years?
Thank you for that great question. We're working with provinces, territories, and Indigenous partners more closely than ever to better connect our grids from east to west and provide more affordable and reliable power for Canadians. This builds on the significant existing federal commitments in investment tax credits, in strategic financing, and in targeted programs. Of note is NRCan's total commitment of $4.5 billion from 21 to 22 fiscal year to the 2035 to 2036 fiscal year to support the deployment of grid modernization, energy storage, and renewable energy and transmission projects across Canada and pre-development and capacity building projects helping communities and organizations develop renewable energy and grid modernization projects. And we're just getting started. We will be announcing a new electricity strategy in the coming weeks, and I'll have more to say about this then.
Wonderful. And I wonder, you touched on in your response there about storage. And I think storage is an underappreciated but critically important part of the electricity question that we're raising here, because we talk about renewables, and obviously that's going to be an increasingly important part of the mix in the years and decades to come. But renewables at times are intermittent, solar and wind obviously being the true prime examples of that. So from your perspective, Minister, how important is storage, and how can we continue to accelerate that so we can actually harness that energy that is not always as reliable as more traditional sources?
You have about 30 seconds.
Sure. So, as you know, grid-scale storage is an important part of developing DERs in the new system, the new grid systems we're building. We've been working with different provincial utilities to look at ways to do that in the most cost-effective way. We've also been exploring what other countries around the world are doing. When I was in China and in India, we looked at some of the exceptional grid storage capabilities they have, and we've looked at potentially bringing that technology to Canada.
Thank you. Thank you both. Monsieur Simard, 6 minutes, allez-y.
Merci
Mr. Simard,
beaucoup.
you have 6 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Hodgson, you're a figures person, a numbers person, a banker. So I'd like to come back to talk about the building of the pipeline that will be will have Alberta as a proponent. We had interesting witness this week, Mr. Harry Johnson, who said that given that the construction costs of a pipeline to the west were very high, he felt it was unlikely that industry favor that solution. So what he's telling us is that probably there would have to be public money going into the pipeline construction. Alberta has already been signaling that by being the proponent. And the issue that concerns me is to know whether the federal government will invest in that infrastructure. So I saw Trans Mountain go by $34 billion for the oil and gas sector, and infrastructure that's not sustainable. Even Mr. Johnson told us that wasn't the case. So my question is quite simple. As a banker, do you believe that a pipeline to the west is sustainable, will be profitable, and will there be public funds from the federal government for this infrastructure?
Shall I proceed? Thank you very much for the question. I don't know, Mr. Johnson, the characterization that the cost will be very high is an incredible amount of detail to absorb. I think we can look at the actual reality that the TMX pipeline is full. It is already ready to be expanded. There is demand for it to be expanded using the tolls that are in place designed to pay for that pipeline. So clearly there is a commercial demand for pipelines to the West Coast. What I can tell you as I went around the world, many countries and also companies were very keen to buy more Canadian oil off the West Coast. They would be thrilled if there was an opportunity to do that. With respect to public money, I want to be clear. What we have said is that we would support Indigenous equity ownership with the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. So there could be scenarios where public money could be used in a pipeline where it was supporting Indigenous ownership of that pipeline.
Ça reste quand même assez évasif.
That is kind of elusive, the amount of public money that can be put into this infrastructure. We don't know. And Mr. Johnson is a specialist of market research for the oil and gas sector. I think he knows his field well. I would like to hear a clear commitment of the government that we won't repeat the experience we had with Trans Mountain government pipeline, where the government assumed the costs for the infrastructure and the private sector did not want to. I understand that the Alberta government is ready to take part in this, but there will be an injustice. All the infrastructures for transmission of electricity in Quebec was paid by Hydro-Québec, so the federal government did not come into that. And so Quebec resented the fact that the electrical infrastructure in Newfoundland was subsidized by the federal government. And so if we were doing that with the pipelines in Alberta, that would be not perceived very well by the Quebec government.
About pipelines when the proponent brings one forward. In the MOU that was negotiated with Alberta, it was a clear priority of that MOU that any pipeline that was brought forward would have Indigenous ownership. If those Indigenous owners wanted support from the federal government to finance their equity, that would be available under the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program. With all due respects, I believe Hydro-Québec does benefit from investment tax credits, so saying that Quebec does not benefit...
Tout à fait. Je vous parle des infrastructures.
I'm talking about infrastructure only. I understand about the 30%. I'm just thinking about infrastructures in the past.
Quebec benefits from investment tax credits, and I would say as a banker, a dollar is fungible, whether it's an ITC or it's an Indigenous loan guarantee. A dollar is a fungible.
Thank you both. And colleagues, we're going to start our second round, and we are going to start that round with Mr. Tucker. Mr. Tucker.
Thank you,
5
Chair,
minutes.
and thank you for the witnesses. Minister, you've been ducking out of this committee for months now, and you're here, and I'm grateful that you are. But for this hour, we're supposed to go through the supplement estimates, the main estimates of 26-27, and then another hour of management of the Canadian nuclear laboratories by U.S. companies. So I will have 5 minutes to ask you questions about this important Canadian jewel in our nuclear industry that is being sold out, the management of, to an all-American-owned company group of companies. How big of a role did the Prime Minister have in putting together the government's policy on nuclear?
Zero.
So the Liberals have proclaimed a Buy Canada policy. How does that line up with selling out the controls of our nuclear labs to the Americans, and the Prime Minister has had zero input in this policy?
So the premise of your question is I think, flawed. The management of the nuclear assets is done by contract. There's a structure where it's done by contract.
I'm sorry, sir. That's not about the question. The question was, the first question was about nuclear labs, and you said that the Prime Minister had zero impact on the policy. Now, on the Buy Canada...
No, let's not misquote me. I didn't say
Canada.
Zero impact. I said zero involvement. Like, let's be clear. He had zero involvement.
So if he didn't have involvement but he had impact?
No, he had zero involvement.
Which companies would have you met with on developing the nuclear policy then?
Are we talking about the nuclear strategy, or are we talking about...
All things nuclear here, sir. We were supposed to have you for an hour, and I got now 4 minutes.
Okay. Well,
So
I'm
which
happy to
companies
answer
have
your
you been
question. You just
discussing?
got to be clear what the question is.
Well, the first question was on the Buy Canadian
Yeah.
policy of the government, and obviously you're ignoring that by going with the Buy All-American-owned group of companies. And
No,
talked about the
no,
Prime Minister
that's
had
not-
zero impact, you said, or influence. And I wanted to know, and the third question was, which companies have, though? Who have you been meeting with?
Okay, I'm confused what are we talking
Which
about nuclear
companies
strategy?
in the nuclear industry have you been meeting with in the last 10 months?
I
You can
have,
get back to me on a written submission if that's you agree to.
I've met with many, many companies. I'm happy to get you a written if that's,
All right.
if that's helpful. But I'm happy to talk about it now, too, if you'd like.
Well, can you talk about how this is not goes against buy Canadian when you buy American?
So we're conflating nuclear strategy and labs. So if we want to talk, let's talk about the management of the labs. That is done by AECL. They decide as an independent crown what is the most cost-effective
Sir, but
way.
we went through this. The board that the Liberals applied for, the board that made that decision was 100% appointed by Liberals. So it is the Liberal government that
it's a crown corporation where their fiduciary duty is to act independently. They ran a process.
So how Buy Canadian supposed to work then? If they're all independent, are they not following your Buy Canadian policy?
The way it works when you go out for tender, I mean, I've done this many, many, many times. You go out for tender, you get a series of tenders in. You evaluate those tenders against the criteria. You go back with another set of questions and demands in your negotiation. Some people fall away. You keep negotiating. Again, people fall away. At the end, there is one entity left.
I have limited time, sir, on the processes then. If you want to talk about how they excluded Canadian,
there was no Canadians
the
excluded.
CNL
There was no Canadians excluded.
Informed that the committee that one of the requirements for a successful bid for the GOCO was experience that meant a winning bid had to come from outside of Canada. You rigged the bidding process so that a non-Canadian companies would receive this.
So the premise of your question is just fundamentally wrong. The ownership of the assets.
It's the man.
The ownership of the assets remains with Canada. The people who are managing it, 99% of them are in Canada and are Canadian.
But 100% owned by the Americans, and that's the concern that I have. Another important part, though. No,
So
this is
are
my
you-
time.
are you-
No, this is my time. I only got 5 minutes of an hour that was promised to me.
You actually only had 15 seconds.
Then I'll close with this then. Would it be easier? So you've been briefed on a whole bunch of nuclear, obviously. You're very knowledgeable, sir. Would you be easier to build a new heavy water plant or build a domestic enrichment capacity for uranium in Canada?
A brief answer,
Which one would be?
Minister.
I'm not sure what easier to build one versus I'm not sure in what context.
So we're going to need more heavy water in the future, and we're going to also need enriched uranium. Both come from outside of Canada. And you as the minister are not aware of which one we're going to build first, or which one's going to be tougher, or what one's going to be cost more money, is concerning for most people in nuclear.
We can come back to that.
I don't think that's what I said, but
Move on to Mr. Danko for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
The nuclear theme, because this is a really important sector for Ontario in particular. And Canada is a leader in nuclear technology, which has the potential to help us meet our growing demand for clean, carbon-free electricity across the country. So my first question, Minister, is kind of big picture. How do you see nuclear fitting into Canada's energy production on a broad scale?
Great question. Thank you. So just to start at the most macro level, there are 4 or 5 countries in the world that would be characterized as tier 1 nuclear capable countries, meaning they can go from the start of the chain in terms of mining the uranium to using their own reactor technology to generate, and all the stages in between. Canada is one of those very few countries that is a tier 1 nuclear country. It's built on the backs of a huge number of Canadian scientists, of Canadian workers, of Canadian miners, and some great can-do technology. We are also the second largest uranium producer in the world and hold the largest high-grade deposits globally, which is a key part of expanding our exports to countries such as India, where we just signed a $2.6 billion supply agreement. And in just the past few months, the CNSC has approved 2 new uranium mining projects in this gentleman's home province of Saskatchewan in the Athabasca Basin, the Denison Mine Wheeler River Project, and the NextGen Energy Rook I project, both of which will support continued investment in Canada's nuclear fuel sector. The Patterson Lake South Uranium Mining Project is also under regulatory review with the CNSC right now, which hopefully there'll be good news on that coming soon. When it comes to deploying nuclear reactors, we are making historic investments in Canada's nuclear sector, including a $2 billion investment through the Canada Growth Fund for the Darlington New Nuclear Project, which will be the first small modular reactor built in the G7, helping to deploy investment across Canada's nuclear supply chain, which is one of the best in the world. We've also launched government-to-government discussions with Poland, where I was in the spring, as a potential adopter of Canada's CANDU technology for their second nuclear power plant site. At the same time, we're working on a nuclear strategy that will lay out our vision to attract billions of dollars of investment and position Canada to continue to be a leader in nuclear innovation.
Thank you, Minister. Really great to hear that momentum in the nuclear sector, especially that our government is taking action to benefit all areas of Canada, including Saskatchewan. Second question is, in your opening statement, you spoke about us being at a rupture in our global geopolitical stage and having the need for Canada to take a leadership role. And that is highlighted by the disruption of the global energy markets due to the war in the Middle East and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So can you elaborate on what Canada is doing to respond, to help bring down prices at the pumps, and to increase Canada's energy security?
Sure. So since coming into office a year ago, our government, as has been noted, has cut taxes by 28 cents per liter, is helping Canadians deal with this reality. We didn't ask for this war, but we have to deal with it. And that includes the 10-cent cut in fuel excise taxes, which took effect this past Monday. Canada's role right now is to bring relief to energy supply shocks that we're all currently experiencing as a result of the conflict in the Middle East. We're supporting the International Energy Agency's largest ever oil stock release by producing 23.6 million additional barrels of crude oil through both incremental production and delays of turnarounds at Canadian facilities. This demonstrates the importance of investment in energy infrastructure that has been made. For instance, the expansion of the TMX has meant that Canada increased oil exports through this pipeline by 100% relative to 2024 levels. The Trans Mountain pipeline has proposed a further 10% increase in capacity through a series of 3 optimization projects. Construction is expected to begin this August, and that project could be operational by as early as January of 2027.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you both. And we're going to move on now to Monsieur Simard. 2.5 minutes.
We have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Terry. So I wanted to see the guaranteed loans program for Indigenous people went from $5 to $10 billion in March 2025, and we're told that they go up to projects worth up to $1 billion. So with a pipeline, if there were several proponents, we could have a form of support from the federal government that could go up to $10 billion. Did I understand the situation properly?
I believe per proponent, there is up to $1 billion. Yes, that is correct.
Oui. Merci. Donc, un potentiel de...
Thank you. So a potential of $10 billion. So I want to come back to the agreement you have with Alberta. If we look at it more closely, we can see that there's a ceiling of the price of pollution to $100 per ton. And what I had read on the Alliance pathway that said for carbon capture and sequestration to be profitable, the price of the ton had to be between $150 and $160. So if Alberta wants to set this at $130, then it's better for businesses to have strategies for carbon capture and sequestration. So I'm asking you, because you're a banker here, so there's no longer a business case for carbon capture and sequestration.
I don't think your characterization is accurate. We're in the middle of ongoing discussions. The MOU is clear that it is a package, and the proponent agrees that for the pipeline to move forward, the Pathways project would move forward. The carbon pricing formula that is being discussed between the federal government and the Alberta government would obviously be required to make the Pathways project economically viable. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I would not bet against Canadian technology. I have watched in my career, having worked with many clean and conventional energy companies, I have watched how Canadian technology has systematically reduced the carbon footprint of our production. When I was at Meg Energy, I watched how new technologies reduced the carbon footprint of each barrel produced by 30%. I think as years go by, we will see more and more.
Je vais juste finir, juste simplement pour point
simply for information here. In the pathway, we would be able to capture 95% of the emissions, and there's no project anywhere in the world that's able to do this.
Merci, Monsieur Simon.
Mr. Martel for 5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I want to talk about natural gas because we know that Canada must be its best client, top client in terms of natural gas. So I would like to know what is the development for responding to energy needs of the east of Canada as well as our allies on the other side of the Atlantic.
Je ne suis pas.
Resources in eastern, energy resources in eastern Canada.
On a des besoins aussi dans
we need natural gas in the east of Canada, and I wanted to know the situation for other countries because you're saying Canada will be a good client, but for Europe, are there any developments to respond to the needs for natural gas in the eastern region? So there are some projects in the north, in the Arctic, that will represent needs.
Natural gas is. I think that's what you're asking. What I can tell you is when I was in Europe, in a number of meetings I've had. We have had strong expressions of interest from multiple EU countries, from multiple non-EU countries in Asia. I'm trying to be discreet here, Asia Minor, and multiple non-EU countries in Europe who are interested in our natural gas. I can tell you. It's commercially sensitive, but several of those countries are in the process of inking contracts with different Canadian projects today.
Est-ce qu'il y aurait possibilité qu'il y ait des
Is there
projets
a possibility that there might be a LNG project in the east that would go out in Europe to Europe?
Again, that would be from a proponent. We don't decide if there's an LNG project in the east. What we do is if there's a proponent who comes forward and says they want to do it and they have the support of the local jurisdiction and they have support of Indigenous peoples, then yes. What we see today is Nova Scotia very clearly wanting to develop its natural gas resources. Premier Houston has been very clear.
Monsieur le ministre, si je vais dans le secteur forestier,
Minister, if I talk about the forestry sector, we know that after several decades of disputes and temporary agreements, I would like it if you could explain to the forestry workers in my region, in the Saguenay, how can it be that government has not yet been able to find a durable solution, a sustainable solution with the Americans on softwood?
So as someone who grew up in a forestry town and knows what it's like to be in a small town where the mill closes, I understand the challenges of the constituents in your riding. The reality is we can't control what the Americans do. We have had free trade since the 1980s in this country in almost all goods. Unfortunately, with respect to forest products, we're in our fifth trade war with the Americans. We have gone to the World Trade Organization. We've gone to the adjudication routes through the different free trade agreements that we've had. We have won every time, and the Americans continue to hoist upon us unjust and unfair and illegal tariffs. What's the old saying? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. The reality of our situation, unfortunately, is the way the money politics works in the United States. The U.S. forest lobby is never going to give us free trade in forest products. So we need to retool our industry. That's why we launched the Transformational Task Force, and we worked with all of industry to come up with a plan to pivot the industry, which as I mentioned in my remarks, we got that report.
les pertes économiques actuelles liées à ce litige-là.
So there's an impact on the productivity of our sector. I think we should be able to reach to an agreement. Have you thought about the figures?
Quick answer.
Have I thought about what? I'm sorry, I just didn't hear your...
Non, c'est que je voulais savoir, est-ce que vous
I
avez...
wanted to know if you have estimated the value of the annual losses connected to this dispute, the impact on competitiveness.
Is in this current illegal set of tariffs the Americans are posing, they have now collected a little, I believe it's somewhere between $10 and $12 billion of unfair and unjust tariffs. And they're holding Canadian producers hostage with that tariff money.
Thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, I've had a conversation with Mr. Clark. He's agreed to cede some of his time for me. That is the chair's prerogative, which I will use today. I use it rarely. Minister, I'm aware that you spent a good part of your life in Manitoba. I'm from Manitoba, as you know, and you're very familiar with the Port of Churchill, Canada's only deep water port in the north. You're also aware that we have been studying energy exports as well as critical minerals and their potential for our country. Churchill is listed as a strategic priority by the Government of Canada, and I wonder if you could say a little bit about your vision for the the Port of Churchill and how it might fit in terms of diversifying our trade and realizing the potential of our energy and critical mineral resources.
Thank you. And I will admit to being a Bombers fan.
What about the Jets?
The Jets, they weren't around when I was a kid, but I am a Jets fan, yes. The Port of Churchill Plus was referred to the major projects offices as an early-stage transformative strategy because of its potential to expand northern export capacity, enhance Arctic sovereignty, and contribute to increased and diversified trade with Europe and other partners, as you well know, Mr. Chair. As you also know, the MPO is working closely with Manitoba, with the government of Manitoba, with Indigenous partners, and with industry to unlock the port's full potential, which could include an all-weather road, an upgraded rail line, marine ice-breaking capacity, and potential new energy export opportunities, including for LNG and other petroleum products. LNG is key to Canada's status as an energy superpower, and we've set ambitious goals for the industry for 2030 and beyond, and Churchill could well play a part in that. With the Canada-Manitoba One Project, One Review agreement signed this week, well done, we're creating the conditions for nation-building infrastructure to advance in Manitoba.
Thank you, Minister. We'll go to Mr. Clark, and you have 2 minutes and 37 seconds.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, as we get into spring and the weather continues to warm, we know that we're entering into wildfire season, and we know that wildfires across the country are becoming increasingly severe and dangerous. You know, growing up in Nova Scotia, wildfires were not really part of life for us, and then 3 years ago, I remember being in my backyard and looking up at the sun and thinking it looked a little strange, a little red, a little unusual, and then all of a sudden we had a fire just down the road from us, 200 plus homes destroyed overnight, miraculously, no lives lost. But it's something that coast to coast to coast we are dealing with in this country. So I wonder if you could give us an update on what the department is doing to strengthen the aerial wildfire response capacity of this country.
Thank you for the question. It's a very important question, and as we come on fire season again, it's very poignant. As you know, we continue to make significant investments to support wildfire management across the country and build Canada's capacity to respond to fires to enhance community safety. In the main estimates, you'll find that we're increasing funding by $70 million to prepare and strengthen our response to wildfires. This brings our total funding to $629.8 million through 2030. This will support the procurement of equipment and 4 aerial water bombers. It will procure firefighting training for the provinces and incorporate Indigenous knowledge into fire management.
In particular, the water bombers is a critical piece. I know there have been some situations in Atlantic Canada, for example, where we've had to kind of shuttle them back and forth between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. To enhance that capacity is critical. When it comes to critical minerals, which has been mentioned already, we know that's going to be one of the major, if not the critical natural resource of the 21st century. Canada is a top 5 producer of 11 critical minerals. We have the reserves, we have the projects, we have the expertise to become a leading producer. Can you share, Minister, what the government is doing to grow the critical minerals sector and attract investment in that really, really important industry?
Yes, and thanks for the question, and it is incredibly important. And as we all think about that vignette of President Trump lecturing President Zelensky about how he has no cards, I think every night about, as I go to bed, how do I make sure we have the very best cards we can? And some of our very best cards are our critical minerals. Because quite frankly, Canada has what the world needs. Our critical minerals are strategic assets that are important to our national and economic security, but also to our allies' national and economic security, and that puts cards in our hands. We're committed to constructive engagement with the U.S. to build a new economic and security relationship using our critical minerals. At the same time, we're taking a leadership role through the Critical Minerals Production Alliance to deepen our existing critical mineral cooperation with allies around the world to respond to deliberate market manipulation by other countries. So far, as part of our efforts to rally all of our allies, we've announced 56 different partnerships with every one of our G7 allies, including, and I'll get the list not completely right, but I think Denmark, Norway, Finland, Japan, Australia. There's a couple of others in there. But
thank you, Minister. That's our time with you today. Really appreciate your testimony and responding to questions. Thank you, colleagues, for your exchanges. Minister, I think you've seen a variety of views around the table. That's quite normal, but this committee is working very well together, and we thank you. I'm going to finish.
Before he's point of order though is, Minister, when are you going to come back and complete the nuclear study for the full hour?
That's not a point of order. So. But a good answer right now, right? Yeah, that's not a point of order, and we will suspend while we set up the next panel. going to resume the meeting, and pursuant to Standing Order 81-4 and the motion adopted on Thursday, March 26, 2026, the committee is resuming consideration of the main estimates of 2026-2027 referred to the committee on Thursday, February 26, 2026. I would like to welcome our new witnesses that join officials from the previous panel. So these are folks I haven't mentioned yet, correct? Exactly. So the whole NRCan family is here. Welcome, family. From the Canadian Energy Regulator, Tracy Sleto, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome back, Tracy. Jason Reed, Executive Vice President, People, Innovation and Results, and Chief Financial Officer. Chris Lowen, Executive Vice President, Regulatory Group. Stefan Sear, Vice President, Corporate Services Branch and Chief Financial Officer. Colin Moses, Vice President, Regulatory Affairs Branch and Chief Communications. And let me make a few comments for the benefit of new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And a reminder that all comments are made through the chair. Each agency will have...
Yeah, it's because it's Mr. Moses, and and will have 5 minutes.
I see. Each agency will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open the floor to questions. So, Mr. Sleto, you have the floor for 5 minutes or less. Ms. Sleto, sorry.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you very much for inviting the Canada Energy Regulator to appear as part of the study on main estimates. My name is Tracy Sleto. I'm the CEO of the CER, and I am joined today by Jason and Chris, as mentioned. In my opening remarks, I will provide a brief overview of the CER's mandate, the 26-27 main estimates, including how our funding is allocated and what it supports in practice. I would also like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded ancestral and traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation, who have lived on and cared for the land now known as Ottawa since time immemorial. Avant de parler de notre budget principal, des dépenses.
Before beginning to speak on the estimates, I will give a brief overview of who we are. The Canada Energy Regulator regulates energy infrastructure in a way that prevents harm and ensures the safe, reliable, competitive, and environmentally sustainable delivery of energy across Canada. This applies to any pipeline that crosses a provincial or international border and the power lines that cross an international border. In addition to being a safety regulator, our mandate also includes a key economic role in financial regulation through the oversight of pipeline tolls and tariffs. We also regulate exports of energy products and oil and gas exploration and drilling in certain northern and offshore areas of Canada. The CER also has a mandate to provide information on energy matters. We provide data and analysis that informs decision-making and fosters dialogue on energy in Canada. All of our work is undertaken in a manner that respects the rights and interests of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. In everything we do, safety and environmental oversight are always at the forefront.
Parliamentary appropriations, and the Government of Canada recovers approximately 95% of the CER's cost from regulated industry. And I'd like now to give context on the CER's main estimates for 26-27. The CER's planned spending is $119.4 million, allocated across four core responsibilities. Safety and environment oversight accounts for $30.7 million, which supports setting and enforcing our expectations for regulated companies across the full life cycle of energy facilities. Energy adjudication receives $29.6 million, supporting the CER's commission decision-making on applications, hearings, and regulatory processes. Our engagement core responsibility is funded at $11 million, enabling engagement and consultation with Indigenous peoples and stakeholders nationally and regionally through open and responsive dialogue. And Energy Information receives $5.3 million to support collecting, monitoring, analyzing, and publishing energy information for Canadians. Lastly, Internal Services, which enables the delivery of the 4 core responsibilities with $42.9 million dedicated to management oversight, communications, legal, financial, and human resource management, as well as IT functions. Within these totals, transfer payments represent $10.6 million of the CER's budget. These funds are used specifically to support Indigenous peoples and stakeholder participation in CER activities, including adjudication, engagement, and safety and environment oversight. As indicated in our 26-27 departmental plan, our core responsibilities are guided by 4 strategic priorities, which are to foster trust and confidence by effectively delivering on our mandate, to enhance Canada's global competitiveness through leadership in regulatory innovation and best practices, to advance reconciliation and implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to prepare for the energy future by offering energy expertise. Through 2026-27, we will continue to modernize our regulatory framework and streamline our processes. This includes initiatives from the CER's Red Tape Review Report, such as launching a new digital portal, significantly reducing decision timelines for routine pipeline applications, removing outdated and unnecessary reporting requirements, and updating our onshore pipeline regulations. In closing, I would like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak with you today and very much look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Leto. Now we're going to go to Mr. Moses. You're up for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, members of the committee.
Thank you, Chair.
Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, and I'm pleased to present here today representing the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. I'm here on behalf of President Pierre Tremblay, who is currently in New Brunswick meeting with Indigenous nations and communities. J'aimerais commencer par reconnaître que nous sommes réunis.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Canada's nuclear sector is growing rapidly, which means a need for greater regulatory efforts. The CNSC focuses on rigorous regulatory oversight. We prioritize the most important safety considerations, and we adapt to new technologies and projects while maintaining our commitment to never compromising on safety.
CNSC has served as Canada's independent nuclear regulator. As a life cycle regulator, we provide rigorous, independent oversight to ensure that Canada's nuclear supply chain and all nuclear-related activities meet the highest standards of safety, security, and environmental protection. The Commission is a quasi-judicial administrative tribunal independent from political, government, and private sector influence, with exclusive jurisdiction over nuclear safety in Canada. La confiance du public envers la CCSN est essentielle.
The public confidence in the CNSC is essential for all nuclear activity in Canada. We're observing a growing interest in nuclear energy, which means it's more important than ever to communicate clearly with the public we serve, to be transparent and collaborative, and to maintain a delicate balance between the interests of project proponents, license holders, and Indigenous nations and right holders.
Upholds its duty to consult with Indigenous nations across its regulatory activities. We are committed to long-term relationships with Indigenous nations and communities and to advancing reconciliation. Through collaboration and ongoing monitoring and oversight, we help ensure Indigenous rights and interests are protected, included by supporting participation and providing funding. We operate with a cost recovery model that ensures our regulatory effort scales with industry activity while limiting impact on taxpayers. 70 to 75% of our costs are recovered directly from the nuclear industry, with 100% cost recovery applied to Class 1 nuclear facilities, which includes nuclear power plants and nuclear waste facilities, and to uranium mines and mills. Close to 80% of our costs are salary-based, reflecting the highly technical and specialized nature of our work. Reactor refurbishments, new mine construction, and new nuclear projects, including both large reactors and small modular reactors, drive higher regulatory workload. This is reflected in our planned spending in 26-27. In short, the CNSC manages its resources carefully with a financial model that ensures rigorous, independent nuclear oversight, clear accountability, and value for money. As workload increases, the CNSC remains focused on strong oversight and value for money. Under our cost recovery model, we are reducing effort in lower safety significance areas so resources are concentrated where they matter most. We work with industry and industry associations to identify opportunities to streamline regulatory processes, including removing duplication, modernizing outdated requirements, and improving how information is reported without weakening oversight. The CNSC also coordinates and collaborates as lead with federal and provincial partners to reduce duplication and support efficiency. This includes our current work to support effective delivery of 4 active integrated impact assessments for major projects, such as a deep geological repository and new nuclear builds for Wesleyville, Bruce C., and Energy Alberta. All this effort contributes to delivering results. In the last year, the Commission issued several significant licensing decisions, including 2 licenses to construct new uranium mines and mills in Saskatchewan, and a license to construct Canada's first grid-scale SMR at the Darlington New Nuclear Project site, making Canada the first G7 nation to start constructing an SMR. These decisions, along with major licensing renewals, licensing amendments, and other regulatory oversight, demonstrate the effectiveness of our regulatory process and our capacity to respond to growing demand. Pour conclure, l'Organisme de réglementation nucléaire
In
du Canada.
conclusion, Canada's Nuclear Regulatory Authority has 2 main priorities: to protect the Canadian public and the environment through a rigorous oversight of existing nuclear activities and to prepare Canada for the future of nuclear energy.
Thank you, Mr. Moses. Thank you to both organizations for appearing before us today as witnesses. We are going to go to questions. Mrs. Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all officials for being here today and for your service to Canada. Ms. Sletto, I just think a lot of Canadians are trying to figure out the interplay between the MPO and the Canadian Energy Regulator. So I just wonder if you can help us understand, for example, a project like the North Coast Transmission Line that has been referred to the Major Projects Office, which has been set up for about a year now. Can you tell Canadians what step that project is in the MPO's, it appears to be 8-step system, and how the interplay between the MPO and the regulator, works?
I will just perhaps clarify that from the Canada Energy Regulator, that is not a project that would be in our jurisdiction. That's one from an energy regulation oversight perspective is actually currently being overseen by the British Columbia Energy Regulator. So that isn't something that I'd be able to speak to today, nor would I be able to provide you with any further information about the Major Projects Office.
So that's because of that, the agreement, the equivalency agreement. So if there's a project that would come, that would have to be adjudicated by the Canadian Energy Regulator, then when a project gets referred to the MPO, at what point do you interplay into the system?
I guess perhaps what I would clarify is we would be working closely with the Major Projects Office on any infrastructure, energy regulated infrastructure that would be under the CER's jurisdiction. But in the case of the project that you're referencing,
right, so what I
that would be the British
so
Columbia
for
Energy
projects
Regulator.
under your jurisdiction, what would be the interplay?
On any project that would be designated under the Major Projects Office, we would be working very collaboratively with the Major Projects Office in terms of the processes that are set out in the Building Canada Act, and to ensure that we're doing our part as the lead regulator for that energy infrastructure, and making sure that the legislation that we need to implement is carried out.
It's wild. The government seems to think that there needs to be $275 million office to tell you, the regulator, what to do, and also proponents where they have to go. So in September at this committee, NRCan also said, quote, the goal is to get these assessments down to under 2 years for all projects. That's, of course, I know the goal that both the Prime Minister and the Minister have cited, although the government rejected my amendment to insert the 2-year timeline into C5. So maybe could the officials from NRCan tell Canadians what concrete steps you're taking to reduce assessments down, and a recommendation one way or the other, down to 2 years?
Sure, maybe I'll start. Thank you for the question. So the government is committed to a one project, one review process to ensure that major projects such as pipelines, nuclear facilities, have a coordinated assessment that receives federal decisions within 2 years.
Well, I know the government said that, except of course, you know, they've created the MPO, a new organization with the Canadian Energy Regulator, the Impact Assessment Act, and the Nuclear Regulator. So there's 4 regulators, all kinds of projects and all kinds of windows, it seems so far.
Yeah, but to give you a concrete example, so the agreements that are being entered into with provinces, for example, in terms of cooperation agreements, help streamline those regulatory approvals and help accelerate projects reviews and help also reduce duplication.
Okay. Right, which of course doesn't take the creation of a whole new office or $275 million. It shouldn't even create that much time for the federal government just to respect jurisdiction and to make those agreements with provinces. Could have been done immediately after the last election, actually. And it seems to me that a year into this government's mandate, it is fair for Canadians to have expected that they take that default approach to respect provincial jurisdiction and the Constitution. There wouldn't be these issues. But my colleagues will continue with questions further on in their opportunity. And just at this time, Chair, I will just move a motion that I did put on notice for all of committee members. So, Chair, I would just like to move that the committee require the Department of Natural Resources, the Canadian Energy Regulator, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and the Northern Pipeline Agency to each provide 4 updates on the to-date implementation of their respective departmental plans for 2026 to 27 to the committee. The first set of updates shall be provided to the committee by no later than June 5th, 2026. The second set of updates shall be provided to the committee by no later than September 18th, 2026. The third set of updates shall be provided to the committee by no later than December 4th, 2026. And the fourth set of updates shall be provided to the committee by no later than March 5th, 2027. Immediately following the reports being provided to the committee, the clerk be automatically instructed to invite the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources to appear before the committee for 1 hour on the implementation of the departmental plans and on his mandate, and to invite officials from each department and agency to appear before the committee on the implementation of their respective departmental plans and on the mandates of their departments or agencies.
Thank you, Mrs. Stubbs. That was on notice and is in order. And Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Chair. So we can't support this fire and forget approach to calendar and committee management. It's unnecessary. The minister's made himself regularly available. It's burdensome. We receive departmental status results reports. We have an established mechanism through which departments provide updates. This asks for a lot of reports. We can always ask for more information. We don't need to slow down departments with broad status report obligations. We can always ask for more information. This motion just fetters this committee. It makes us less able to respond to events as they are, the issues as they come forward. We, of course, understand why the opposition is bringing it up at this time, but it's just bad practice. So I recommend we just call the vote.
We'll call the vote. All right, Mr. Clerk.
On the motion of Ms. Stubbs, Mr. Hogan.
Nay.
Mr. Gay.
No.
Mr. Danko.
Nay.
Mr. Clark.
Nay.
Ms. Stubbs.
Yes.
Mr. Tucker.
Yes.
Mr. Martel.
Yes.
Mr. Rowe.
Yes.
Monsieur Simard.
C'est le fun, le suspense. Oui.
Suspense is great.
Un petit peu de suspense à l'occasion.
5 yeas, 4 nays.
That the motion is carried. Thank you, colleagues. And Mrs. Stubbs, you still have. Oh, it's overtime. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, I was trying to be on time and
yes, thank
not
you,
interfere
thank
with
you.
any other member's ability to ask questions.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Mrs.
officials.
Stubbs. So we're going to go on to Mr. Hogan.
Well, thank you, Chair. It's just motion hour, apparently, here at Natural Resources Committee. I'm also going to move a motion that was put on notice on March 26th. I'm going to read it into the record here. Je crois que Monsieur Simard aura un amendement. Yeah, merci. Et alors,
I believe Mr. Simard will have an amendment.
Son autonomie
Considering that Canada has an interest in ensuring its energetic self-sufficiency and its energetic security, that pursuant to Article 108.2 of the regulations, the Standing Committee on Natural Resources hold at least 4 meetings to have a study on energy security in Canada, and the committee communicates its recommendations, and that as a result of Article 109 of the regulations, the committee present an exhaustive, complete report. I wanted to say that Corey's French is really, really improving. Our next trip, Gaëtan and I will not be the only francophones. So I think we did send you the proposed amendment because it's a text that's quite long. So quickly, I would cross out the first sentence, considering that Canada has an interest in ensuring its energy self-sufficiency and its energy security. We would start with, pursuant to Article 108 of the regulation, the Standing Committee on Natural Resources, and then we would strike out hold at least 4 meetings to carry out a study on energy security in Canada. And we would add that the Standing Committee of Natural Resources carry out a detailed study on electrification, energy self-sufficiency, and energy security in Canada, aiming to evaluate maximizing technologies for clean electricity, study problems and solutions related to the demand for energy during peak periods, examine the role of the government in the diversification of markets and the development of industry, define the importance of the sector of clean energy to achieve our net carbon zero targets, analyze putting into place public policies wishing to contribute to electrification, and look at the issues related to energetic self-sufficiency and energy security in Canada, and respect the jurisdiction of provinces and territories. We would cross out that the committee presents a report to the House on its conclusions and its recommendations. We would say, rather, that the committee invite any witness that it deems to be pertinent, and that the committee hold at least 6 meetings in the context of the study, that a report presenting its conclusions or recommendations be prepared and presented to the House, and that, pursuant to Article 109, that the committee ask the government to table in exhaustive report to the report. Thank you, Mr. Simard.
Order.
L'amendement est en règle. Est-ce que tout le monde en a reçu un exemplaire? Oui. Pour notre collègue, Monsieur Simard, je vois que... En fait, ma question est la suivante. Avez-vous l'intention de faire des études individuelles à propos de la transmission de l'énergie et de la demande en énergie électrique, puis une autre étude sur l'autonomie énergétique du Canada et la sécurité énergétique intérieure, ou est-ce que vous proposez tous ces thèmes pour faire...
I'm sorry, translation was not... I didn't hear the translation, so I didn't hear...
L'interprète n'a pas besoin de présenter des excuses pour tous les fois.
Doesn't need to apologize for every time she's having all those problems with witnesses who are speaking too quickly. So maybe you could repeat what you said.
Too quickly. So I'm just wondering if your aim here is to have 2 separate studies, one on the electrification, transmission, and power demand issues that you're trying to get into, separate from internal energy security and energy autonomy, like writ large? Do you want to decouple those, or do you want one study that does all of it? And is there really enough time?
Dans le fond, c'est plutôt...
Actually, it's rather one study, and that can be easily explained because in the context of the committee, we've carried out a study on electrical energy, and then there was a prorogation. So that study never led to a report, and currently in the energy exports, we've discussed the gas and oil issue a lot, and we also touched on energy security in that context. I think it would be interesting because maybe very soon there will be a presentation of the political orientation of the Department on electrification. And I think it would be interesting for us to examine that in 6 meetings, which gives us some latitude to broach other topics. But I wanted to have some very specific issues so that we could bring in witnesses who would be knowledgeable on those issues. So also earlier we had a discussion, I talked to Claude about that. In the past, no one accepted, as far as I know, to look at the evidence that was collected during a study in order to make a report. There were people who weren't there and who might be interested. So if we carry out 6 meetings, we also discuss that together, thinking that that's the approach we wanted to adopt. So I think it's all in good order.
And shall we go to the vote? Do we need a vote? Consensus? Okay. The amendment is agreed to. The motion as amended is agreed to. It is unanimous. Thank you, colleagues. Okay, I'll just ask Mrs. Stubbs to take the chair. And colleagues, I want you on your best behavior. And I'm going to ask Mrs. Stubbs for a report.
Well, I'll be on my best behavior because and the clerk will just make me look like I know what I'm doing. So we will resume our questioning, and we will go to Monsieur Simard for 6 minutes.
Merci. Donc,
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, well look at me saying I would be on best behavior and then try to cut you off before at my very first move. Well, go, you can...
Okay, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Being here. I really greatly appreciate every time we get to talk to our professional public service. I also really enjoy every time we talk to Calgarians. So, you know, it's just a win-win for me right now. I'm super pleased to be here. And I'm hoping we can start with some table setting. I think it's a good opportunity to get your thoughts as to where the puck is going, what you think will be new or changed this year, and how the estimates support that and reflect that. And maybe Mr. Ornzak, you can start, and perhaps then we can hear from Ms. Stiletto.
Sure. Thank you for the question with respect to the estimates for the department. As the minister had mentioned, we're seeking budgetary authorities on the order of $4.9 billion for this year, and that's a reduction from last year where it was $5.1 billion. Some of the increases reflect additional spending on the government's priorities. For example, the estimates reflect recent budgetary announcements about the critical minerals strategy and the critical minerals infrastructure fund. We're also contributing to the government's trade infrastructure strategy for investments in the first and last mile fund, for example. There's also an increase in terms of the biofuel production incentive program that's in direct response to some of the U.S. Policy changes. And we're also seeing increases in the smart renewables an electrification pathways program on the order of $150 million in this year's estimates, and also seeing some changes in investments as it relates to forest fire management, including what the minister talked about as it relates to additional capacity and aircraft to fight forest fires, including through the upcoming firefighting season.
Thank you. And Ms. Sleto?
Much. The budget for 2026-27 for the Canada Energy Regulator, as I described in my opening remarks, does show the kinds of investments that we're making across some very key areas. And just to highlight a few that we think are quite important for the coming year, in terms of our safety and environment oversight activities, we have very critical and important compliance verification activities and the continued delivery of those inspection activities on the energy infrastructure that we regulate. So there's 73,000 kilometers of pipeline, for example, in Canada that we want to ensure is operated and maintained in a safe manner. That joint inspection activity and compliance verification activity is funded largely through the allocation to our safety and environment oversight area. In our energy adjudication area, I'll just highlight some significant investments that we've been making and will continue to make with the appropriation that is granted to us in improved decision-making, streamlining, and improved efficiency. That's both in that core responsibility, but also in the internal services that support it. And I'd highlight an investment and launch of something called the CER portal that was just updated and released with some critical updates this spring that helps to digitize and automate how regulated industry would interact with the regulator and how we would manage and support decision-making processes with those efficiencies in mind. And we see it in very tangible results with respect to the timeliness and efficacy of our decision-making processes, some real improvement there. And then with respect to just one other area I'll highlight, and that's in our energy information area, we continue to deliver very, I think, quite high quality and really focused energy information and analysis to Canadians, including the Energy Futures Report that was released just some weeks ago. Very well received and certainly providing information and analysis that helps inform the energy dialogue in Canada. This, in addition to market snapshots or other provincial territorial profiles or those kinds of products, that's what the funds that are appropriated to the CER really help to support. And I can give you numerous other examples, but certainly wanted to highlight those in response to your question, and thank you for it.
Thank you both. I really appreciate it. I heard about an enhanced focus on critical minerals. I heard about biofuels and responding to the United States. I heard about smart renewables, the importance of electrification, and I heard about forest fire management. I heard about efficiencies, timeliness, and allowing future development to occur at speed. And I appreciate that those priorities of the government are being reflected in the work of the department and the agencies. I'm wondering if anybody here would like to take a crack at sort of explaining how they see perhaps in the future we might want to be thinking about in the department or at the committee how the department will be approaching work as the relationship with the world continues to evolve and we start looking even more so at expanding to international markets and how that might affect the work as interpreted through the estimates.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a crack at that. So thank you for that question. I think Canada continues to be and continues to play a role as a reliable supplier in global energy and resource markets. That's particularly important today as we see more disruption in the world, including in the Middle East. I think what that will mean for the department is taking more coordinated actions on the international scene as it relates to our energy security needs, our energy sovereignty, including through increasing the supply of oil and LNG to
Brilliantly
our allies.
on time.
That is helping to stabilize global markets, but also helping to advance the country's economic interests. I think you'll see similar activities as it relates to securing our supply chains for critical minerals, working with
yes, and that's the end of the round. I give some leeway. So
Thank you
could
very
get a
much.
full
Well, I
answer.
appreciate it, Chair. Thank you.
Yes. Well, with my apologies again, Mr. Hogan. Now we'll go to Mr. Simard for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Maybe you could enlighten me. Earlier, I asked the minister a question about the funding of the pipeline that's going towards the west, to know if there might be public funding, and he answered that it was possible through the loan guarantee program for Indigenous people. If we look at that program more closely, we see that we've gone from $5 billion to $10 billion, and for a maximum of $1 billion for a project or for a proponent. So in the context of the pipeline, we're estimating that the pipeline may cost between 30 and 40 billion. Would it be possible that that be associated to several Indigenous communities that might be stakeholders for the funding, and that we might reach the maximum amount, which would be 10 billion as loans for Indigenous communities? Is that part of the analysis carried out by the department?
Maybe I'll take a crack at your question in terms of the loan guarantee program. So you're right. The government made a commitment to a $10 billion Indigenous loan guarantee program. I think in practice how that supports the construction of a future pipeline will depend on the proponent that comes forward and the support that that proponent is able to garner through their work with Indigenous communities. And I think we'll have to wait to see that in terms of the specific Indigenous participation and how Indigenous ownership and participation could be financed through programs by the Government of Canada, but potentially through other
Je vais pas vous
programs as
couper,
well.
je veux juste être plus clair.
I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to be more specific. So hypothetically, let's say, would it be possible that there be 10 Indigenous proponents that would be associated with the pipeline and which could supply 10 billion? Is that hypothetically possible?
The program could provide.
Could you? The interpreters are just having a challenge because you're wonderfully diplomatically soft-spoken. So if you could just raise your voice a little bit, that'll help them out.
No, I appreciate that. Happy to do that. So it's a $10 billion loan guarantee program. So it will depend on the loans that the program backs. But I think hypothetically, your math can work.
Okay, merci. Oh,
Okay, thank you. Oh, I wasn't expecting such frankness. So for the Canadian Energy Regulator, you said that you had carried out analyses, studies to estimate what the cost of such an infrastructure would be, a pipeline going west. I imagine you have carried out analyses on that basis, and maybe even some analyses to determine if that kind of infrastructure could be profitable. I am saying that because I remember the analysis carried out by the parliamentary budget officer who came and told the committee that the Trans Mountain Pipeline was not profitable over 40 years, or not sustainable with the price that was being asked of users. Have you carried out such an analysis? Or would you have that information?
An opportunity for me to clarify the kind of energy information and analysis that we conduct as part of our mandate. And that really is with respect to broad market analysis, some of those sort of macroeconomic analysis and energy supply and demand scenarios. That's really the focus of our Energy Futures work. It would not be specific to any one project. There would not be that, the kind of analysis that you just described is not what would be the role or the mandate of the Canada Energy Regulator with respect to its energy information work. And certainly...
Pardon, je veux pas vous couper non plus.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but there's somebody who's quite credible who came and to speak to us last week, Mr. Rory Johnston, who also carries out studies on the market opportunities for the oil and gas sector, and exploring what the markets are is goes hand in hand with the infrastructures. If we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have access to the markets. So I suppose that these are variable elements that you need to take into consideration. The government is basing itself on what if it wants to get involved in building infrastructure and major projects, if there are no analyses that indicate that it's viable, that the economic benefits associated to that can be beneficial for all Canadians. So that would be quite worrisome.
Opposition MP, I hate to say that. So I wonder if maybe they could submit answers. Okay, so we'll go to the next round, and that'll be 5 minutes for Corey Tucker.
What is the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission doing to ensure that it complies with the Government of Canada's Buy Canadian policy?
So the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, our focus is on ensuring the safety, security, the protection of the environment, and Canada's alignment with our international agreements on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. And so we have no role in ownership or ownership decisions related to nuclear activities in Canada. And so perhaps our colleagues from Natural Resources Canada might be better placed to speak to
just
those
interested
questions.
in the CNSC here. So you don't have a view of Canadian sovereignty or some of the slogans. You're not elbows up then, it sounds like?
Well, our role is to align to the mandate that's given to us by Parliament, which is focused on the regulation of nuclear activities. And that's where we limit our focus.
I'm not questioning your loyalty to the country. I know you're a good Canadian, and it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's important because of the climate that we're in. So it's related to a real-world example. You get two applications to similar projects in a similar province at the same time. One is owned by an American company, one is owned by Canada. You give priority to the Canadian one, I'm assuming, but I'd like to hear from you.
So again, the ownership of those specific projects are not our concern, but maybe to give you a very specific example, we had a similar situation in Saskatchewan recently, where we had two coincident regulatory reviews looking at uranium mines and mills in northern Saskatchewan, the Rook I project and the Denison project. And both of those proceeded through a regulatory process in a coincident manner. So we looked at those questions in parallel, worked with both proponents equally, and held almost coincident
we wouldn't give a preference
proceedings.
to the Canadian one in the example that I asked. You brought up Rook I. That was over 7 years that it was sitting at the regulatory. And we'll get back to that project here later on in questioning. You would be the licensing body that would license a new heavy water production facility in Canada or a nuclear enrichment facility. Is that correct? That would fall within you.
That's correct. If we have previously licensed heavy water production facilities in the past, there's no longer any of those facilities operational in Canada. And similarly, any conversion activities, enrichment activities would all fall under the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission.
That would be very concerning. It isn't concerning in the industry. Those are the two critical elements. If we were talking about our energy security with nuclear, those would be the two weak elements, right? That I'm sure that you do forward planning and forecasting, but the current path that we're on, we're reliant on foreign states for our heavy water and our enrichment, correct?
So perhaps my colleagues from Natural Resources could speak to certain aspects of that
We don't
question.
enrich it in Canada.
But I would say that the history of CANDU and technology involved the use of, in the moderator of these reactors, it uses heavy water. and that heavy water is used to moderate the neutron flow to
Yes.
facilitate the nuclear reaction.
And we don't
And
produce
as
any of that
part
heavy
of
water in
that,
Canada anymore.
so
Between the
as
two
part of
projects,
that-
which ones could be easier to be licensed? Would it be the heavy water, which we're going to need, and we're going to need with the GE Hitachi SMRs coming online, we're going to need enrichment. So some forward planning on the department would have, kind of sketched out what that would look like. Which one's easier?
So maybe just if I could finish the previous question, as part of the initial preparation for the Candy reactors and other reacher, there was a significant stockpile of heavy water that was created and is maintained in Canada. With respect to your question around our regulatory oversight, both would follow our rigorous regulatory review. We'd look at those against a series of different technical considerations, ensure that the proponent
But
and
which one's
ourselves-
easier, though, sir?
So
is there one that's going to be quicker?
I think both are looked at
So we're not going to pick
comprehensively.
on which one that we're going to need. You brought up the next gen Rook 1 project. It was over 7 years to get approval. What is the CNSC doing to increase efficiencies and reducing bloated approval timelines?
Appreciate the question. The CNSC recognizes the importance of timely regulatory decisions. As part of that, we've reviewed our current internal processes. We've looked and prioritized our work. We've actually refocused, given the scale of nuclear development in Canada, on current applications before us to ensure that we're ready and prepared to regulate those facilities.
And that is
in
the round,
case-
so you could finish your reply.
thank you.
Yeah.
In written response, if you would like to build out that a little bit more, because I do think 7 years is way too long.
That's the round. And now we'll move to the parliamentary secretary for 5 minutes.
Madame la Présidente, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to all government officials who are here with us. We really appreciate the work you're doing for all Canadians. I would like to speak this, maybe Mr. Onachek, you'll be able to pass this question to one of your assistants. I'd like to talk about the fund for the first and last mile, which is funded in the main estimates. And I would like you to explain how this can contribute to increase the viability of mining projects so that Canada can mine the huge deposits that we have. We carried out a study on critical minerals in this committee, so we're quite aware of Canada has the advantage of possessing. And how could this play a role in the funding of the private sector if we are there to help them in terms of the infrastructure to make it more sustainable, more viable, to allow our minerals to come out of the earth, and once they've been extracted, that can be sent to Canada or to other markets that interest us.
Thank you for your question. So the First and Last Mile Fund is a $1.5 billion fund, and the purpose of the fund is to help address some of those infrastructure gaps, which, if addressed, could help accelerate the development of new critical mineral resources and support the regions in which some of this activity takes place. It would support supply chains and would also help improve market access. To give you some examples of how the fund would enable that, it could, for example, support the development of mining sites if there is roads like infrastructure or transmission lines that are required to enable those sites. Those would be eligible expenditures from the fund. It could also help support midstream processing for priority projects. The other way in which the fund can help accelerate the development of critical mineral deposits is a recognition that a lot of these deposits are located in areas with indigenous interests and indigenous territories. So the fund also provides funding to support and enable Indigenous engagement and participation throughout the mining value chain.
Beaucoup pour cette réponse.
Thank you very much for this detailed response. So I've seen that the increase of contributions for the renewable energies and smart things for the electrification, tarification went from $312 billion from around $200 billion. How does this reflect the priorities of your department, Mr. Orenchuk, and the work you're doing to create a more sustainable energy grid? And we all know that we need modernization.
So the total commitment from the department over a 15-year period is about $4.5 billion for this program. And it's helping with the objectives that you've outlined in a number of different ways. It's helping to support the deployment of grid modernization so that those grids are up to date. It's helping to support projects associated with energy storage and renewable energy. It's helping to advance transmission projects across Canada. And it's also helping with pre-development and capacity building to support how communities are preparing to develop renewable energy projects as well as grid modernization projects. And if you're interested, happy to provide examples of projects that have been funded by the program as well.
There's 4 seconds left.
Est-ce que ce programme-là peut être utilisé par...
Could this program be used and would have advantages for Indigenous communities?
Brief, it has provided funding for Indigenous-owned projects already.
So now we will move back to Monsieur Simard for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Shannon. Merci.
Thank you very much, Shannon. So I'll try and be more clear for you, Ms. Slato. You see, the government announced its firm intention to increase the trade corridors, to increase foreign partners, and to have more energy exports. So that's not just something we desired. It's built on an analysis of markets. The Quebec Energy Authority, when Hydro-Quebec wanted to export energy to the U.S., the authority asked how much it would cost, what was the economic advantage for Quebec. And I suppose that the federal government would also make these decisions in a detailed way. What could help us at the committee would be that you could communicate with us the studies and analyses you have of that nature. If they don't exist, I would be curious to know if there are any such studies at the department. So it is something that's necessary as a prelude to huge expenses. So I'd like to know how the decisions are made, from what information, and maybe you could provide that to the committee so we could better understand where the government's going. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Perhaps I might articulate it in this way. When I speak about our energy information mandate, that market analysis, those broad supply and demand scenarios, those long-term economic analysis and information that we provide as part of that mandate would be very much in those broad macroeconomic context. What you're asking about are specific project estimates and potentially cost estimates related to any specific initiative. And I would then differentiate that energy information mandate from our energy adjudication mandate. And so with respect to specific project decisions, when there's an application before the CER, that's before our commission, and that quasi-judicial function of adjudicating any project that comes before the CER, part of the analysis, either in terms of the safety regulatory oversight mandate that we hold or our economic regulatory oversight mandate that we hold, on tolls and tariffs matters, for example, would include that kind of economic analysis. But what you're describing is often provided in the context of project proponents bringing that information forward. That wouldn't be something that the CER would
Fort intéressant ce que vous dites.
develop itself.
Peut-être que je
You're
vais
saying is
rebondir.
very interesting. Maybe I can react to that quickly. To ask the people from the department, if that's the case, how are government orientations or policies developed? If we're waiting for a promoter to come with that information before a strategy can be determined. Wait, I will end with this. If you have any documents, I would like the department to provide us that.
So now we'll move for 5 minutes to Monsieur Martel.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to talk to you about forest fires. I know that you have a policy of buying Canadian, but can you tell me exactly how the expenses in surveillance for fires are translated into direct contracts for specialized businesses and providers of equipment who are Canadian?
Thank you for the question, and I'm going to ask Glenn Hargrove, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Canadian Forest Service, to provide more details as it relates to that. But I will preface that the department works closely with provinces and territories and the Canadian Forest Service to help coordinate those supports and interventions. But I will ask Glenn to speak to further details associated with this.
Thank you, Deputy, and I'm just very excited to get to use my name card today. Thank you for the question. So, when and sorry, just I want to make sure that I'm answering the question that you're posing. But we have a number of different ways in which we support the provision of information around wildfire. And equipment for battling wildfire. So, in terms of equipment, we have a program that provides funding to provinces and territories to purchase wildfire fighting equipment, and we do that through contribution agreements with those provinces and territories. We have 12 agreements across the country. We also work to provide wildfire behavior modeling and observation and things like that that we do through the department and through our scientific teams, and so those are offered throughout the wildfire season, and so there's quite a range, and so I just want to make sure I'm answering your question to the fullest. Does that help?
Yeah, moi je voudrais vous parler aussi de.
I would also like to speak to you about some recent data that indicates that our boreal forest is not growing back in a normal way after the fires. And I'd like to know what your strategy is to ensure the sustainability of the forest resource. I'm sorry, but my headphone was not working, so I misunderstood. So there is data, recent data, that are showing that 1/3 of our boreal forests are not growing back in the usual way after forest fires. So I'd like to know if there is a strategy that you have to ensure the sustainability of forest resources. So there are several ways by which we collaborate with the province.
Program. One of the key focus areas of that program is to rejuvenate areas that have been affected by forest fires. So that's a key focus of that program. And while that program is winding down, we are honoring all the existing agreements under that program. We also have a number of researchers who we have quite a large science program that looks at the interaction between sustainable forest management and the impacts of wildland fire, including in the boreal ecosystem. And so we have researchers that are looking at, with the increased frequency and severity of forest fires, how that impacts the regeneration of those areas, and particularly when we have what are called short interval reburns and the impact on those areas. And so we are doing research on the impacts of that and how that can be mitigated.
Si un tiers des forêts brûlées parviennent pas à se
third of the forests where there have been fires cannot regenerate, your carbon sequestration strategy is compromised. Do you understand that these climate anticipations are based on a forest assumptions that no longer hold true?
With translation.
D'accord. Désolé, mon ordinateur.
So I'm sorry. My earpiece is not working.
On carbon stores, and so we do take those sorts of things into account in how we monitor carbon flows in the boreal forest and other forest ecosystems.
Thank you. And maybe if there's anything more you want to supplement to that, you could submit that to the committee. So for our final round of questioning, we will go to Mr. Clark for 5 minutes.
With the time allocations. Much more generous than Mr. Duguid, I must say.
Well, maybe you guys want to have another vote for chair.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go that far. Let's. Yeah, we are, but there's limits to everything. I wanted to talk a little bit about, similar to what Mr. Martel was talking about around the forestry sector. So, Mr. Hargrove, please stay here. We know that it's a hugely important sector across the country, 300 communities at least, 200,000 people roughly in that sector, but one that's also, of course, dealing with a lot of difficulty at the moment, imposed from abroad mostly. Now, I know that the department was mandated to create the Canadian Forest Sector Transformation Task Force. I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Mr. Hargrove, or Mr. Ornchak, but I'll let you guys stick handle that. But could you just give us an update on the work of that task force and kind of what's going to come next coming out of that?
So maybe I'll start. So thank you for the question. Sure. So the task force was launched to help advise on how to restructure and retool the forest sector to increase its competitiveness and provide some advice that is going to help with the sustainability of the sector over the long term. The task force's report was received by the minister last week, I believe at the end of last week, and we're currently in the process of reviewing the report, and the minister will have more to say on next steps in the near future.
You wanted to add on that?
Yeah, maybe I'll just say that really grateful to the members of the task force. The co-chairs and all of the members of the task force were extremely dedicated. They contributed a lot of their time over the last 90 days and their expertise, and we're really excited to receive their recommendations and to use those to inform next steps. So I think they've done an excellent job, and we'll continue to work through the roadmap that they've offered.
Sure, we all look forward to hearing more on that. So thank you for that update. As the minister mentioned in the first hour, the contributions in the estimates for support of fighting and managing wildfires increased this year by about $70 million from 80 to 150, so nearly double. How is the department using these funds to better manage and better deal with wildfires that, as we know, year over year are becoming more severe, more consistent, unfortunately, and happening at broader swaths of the year as well?
So the additional funds, just over $70 million in this year's estimates, are mainly being used to help supplement provincial and territorial aerial firefighting capacity. The department is working with the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre to help police and manage the deployment of wildfire aircraft throughout the upcoming fire season, depending on the demand that may exist, to help improve our systems readiness and help support wildfire suppression efforts across the country.
And Mr. Hargrove, perhaps I could ask you as well. Going back 10 years ago, I worked for the Natural Resources Minister in Nova Scotia, and I always found that, and over the ensuing 10 years, and talking to local firefighters and provincial and coordination, over and over again, always came up as one of the more difficult things when it comes to managing wildfires. How can the department be helpful from kind of that umbrella role to make sure that, when wildfires happen, as they inevitably do and will, we are as coordinated as we possibly can be to make sure that we're fighting these things as efficiently as possible?
That's a great question. So the deputy mentioned the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Centre. So that's an organization that's owned by the federal government and the provinces and territories. And so through CIFC, as it's generally known, we work collaboratively across jurisdictions on things like resource sharing. So for instance, when firefighters and equipment come from, say, BC to Nova Scotia, that's coordinated through CIFC. We also work with them on coordinating firefighters from international jurisdictions that come to help us, and so that's one of the reasons that we're working with CIFC on the procurement and management of these new aircraft, is so that those can be managed within that sort of framework of collaboration with the provinces and territories, and ensure that that there's a collective effort to identify the greatest need and deploy those resources where they're needed most. So that's really a critical part of the system across Canada, and CIFC really plays an important role in that.
Thank you, and I've just given a bit of extra time so you could fully answer that question for the member.
Through Natural Resources Canada, provide grant money that is the federal sort of support for their operating from a federal level. So,
and that is time, and you could submit anything further if you'd like. Thanks. Well, I just want to thank on behalf of the committee all of the officials and witnesses for being here today. I know that these are short time spots. It's difficult, obviously, for the MPs to ask questions in the time. And it certainly is a challenge for all of you to be able to answer the questions in the time allotted, given the complexity, the scale, and scope of all of the work that you do in service of Canada. So thank you for giving your time to us today and participating in this exercise of accountability. I'm sure we'll see you all again. You, of course, are free to leave us if you like. We just have colleagues, just 2 items that we'll finish off here. And witnesses, you can stay if you like, or you can go on with your lives now. Thank you all. So should we deal with this first or the witnesses?
Yes, first.
Okay. I think I was just going to screw up the order of go here, so I thought I would just double check. So, colleagues, we, of course, have to vote on estimates since we just had a meeting about them. So I just wonder if I have unanimous consent to call the vote on the main estimates in one motion.
Second page, so the motion you go just the big paragraph at the top.
So, thank you to the clerk for helping me appear like I know what I'm doing here. So, shall vote 1 under Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, vote 1 under Canadian Energy Regulator, vote 1 under Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, votes 1, 5, and 10 under Department of Natural Resources, vote 1 under Northern Pipeline Agency, less the amounts voted in the interim supply shall they carry. Shall I report the votes, less the amounts voted in interim supply to the House? And okay, great. And one last thing on the energy security and transmission motion that we move collectively. I think that there's an appetite to have witness lists submitted by May 1st. All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? Thank you.
Best year ever.